Hello, this is Julie Fitzgerald from Guide K-12. We're ready to start our webinar, so thank you all for attending. We're really excited to have a great group of people with us today. Like I said, this is Julie Fitzgerald from Guide K-12, and we're just a few logistics before we get started, just a few simple details. We want to be sure that everyone gets all their questions answered. But we're going to let the presentation go, and you can go ahead and type them into the chat so we can answer the questions at the end. We will address them, and we'll also post them to our website as needed. All the slides that you're going to see, as well as this recording, will be posted to the Guide K-12 website within 24 hours of the webinar completing, so you can share it with others. Now, with those logistics out of the way, I'd also like to just step into a little bit more about our topic and our presenter today. From a Guide K-12 perspective, we love when our customers can share their success stories with others, and that's what this is all about today. Is there's just a great success story that there's a lot to learn from. So, and there's Kristin has a lot of multiple success stories, and she's just such a joy to work with. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker. She is from Wayzata Public Schools, the Director of Administrative Services, and has been in her role for several years with a wealth of experience. So it's my pleasure to introduce Kristin Tollison. Welcome, Kristin, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's glad to be here. Are you hearing me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad to be here. We have a nice balmy 45 degrees in Minneapolis for those of you that are in other parts of the country. Wayzata Schools is a wonderful school district that I've worked for 21 years, and we have about over 11,000 students, and we are lucky to be opening another elementary school in the fall of 16. So because of that, we needed to do boundary adjustments, and so we started this process last year, and I am now a dyed-in-the-wool boundary geek. I have too much fun playing with the data and working in Guide K-12 and looking at scenarios. So in addition to Wayzata, I did help another school district do these same things, and so I guess you can know that the process and the steps that we're going to look through can work for both a large suburban school district as well as a smaller, more rural school district. So with that, I'll go through the slides and then look forward to answering questions that you may have. So thanks very much for having me. I'm ready to get started. I just want to give you a little background on Wayzata Public Schools. Like I said, we have over 11,000 students, and we are opening our 12th facility. On the left, you'll see where we were starting from, and we're a very robust, growing school district. And so we had created sort of a patchwork of attendance boundaries due to the different developments that were coming online. They were going into schools that had capacity. And with the new school that we were opening, we knew we needed to kind of readjust. And so I will give you the preview. The snapshot on the right is kind of our finished project, the end result of all of our work. You'll have to bear with me. My analogy today is game plan, and so we are going to go through and kind of play that out. We considered our district staff the coaches, and their role in this process was to provide factual information. We kind of didn't ask them to be decision makers. Those were for our school board and our citizens committee. And I'm also am abundantly aware of not caution, but just being thoughtful about the role of principals. Principals have a tough spot because many of the families are appealing to them and asking for information, asking for input, asking for them to affect the process. And principals have a tough spot. So we really encouraged or asked our principals to be factual and to provide, be a coach or provide information, but not put them in the position of having to pit or organize one group of families against another. We had a citizens committee, and we called them the team. They were representative of the community. We actually ran an application process. We had over 90 applicants for our process. Um, and so we worked through that to make sure that they were representative of the community, that we had at least 2 from every school, elementary school. We also made sure that we had some folks that had been through previous boundary changes, and some folks that were at the high school that had a real kind of a bird's eye view of the school district from their perspective. Their role was to learn and to make a recommendation to the board. The school board are the general managers. They develop the rules, which we'll talk further about, the guiding principles, and they make the final decision. The community and parents, we lovingly call them our fans. They provide input and feedback along the process. And we found it beneficial to have facilitation, somebody that is a referee that's objective, that kind of keeps things moving along, reminds us when we've lost track or may have lost sight of something. It is hard when you're in the middle of a boundary change. The emotions often are running very high, and it's really important to keep an objective perspective, and that can be hard, but the facilitator helped quite a bit in that way. So in advance, there's a lot of work to get warmed up and get ready in advance of a boundary change. I can't say enough that having clear, defined data and kind of agreeing upon the data in advance, how valuable that is. It's very hard if the data is changing or you're reviewing different kinds of data and it doesn't agree. We obviously use Guide K-12, and it's integrated with our student information system. And so we had up to the minute information. We actually started with using one data set. We used a March 1 data and worked from there, and then so that it wasn't constantly changing, and then could double check it with future data to make sure that it still worked. Other really strong data that needs to be incurred, if that's needs to be gathered, is census, your birth to 4, rates, locations, whether the pattern is going up or down, current enrollment, patterns of growth or decline in housing, and the same in student enrollment. If there are upcoming or recent changes in the economy, a new large-scale employer in the community, new housing developments that are coming online, other types of demographic data, and I'm thinking of, perhaps where your families that maybe subsidized housing, or where you may have apartment buildings that may have high turnover. Class sizes. Establishing class sizes or we called them targets for our schools, is really important. It sounds like a simple number, but if you say that, for example, a school can hold 500 children, and you decide to go with 510, then the perception may be that you're, putting too many kids in a building, when really we all know that most building capacities are somewhat elastic. If you raise class size by 1, you can, make the building bigger. If you take a choir room offline and make it a classroom, it's 25 students bigger. So just deciding what the range was or what the target was for each school. And that's, I guess I'm talking a little bit more, both class sizes and for the building capacity. If the building, that's more what I was saying was the elastic nature of the building. And the same thing a little bit with class sizes. Is it a set number that K through 2 has? Is it a set range or target? And then any transportation parameters your school has. If you enforce a 1-mile walk zone, if you have walk areas, if you have certain folks that do or don't qualify, or there's some type of shuttling system that happens, just knowing what that is. We used Guide K-12 to help us diagram the play. And what I mean by that is that we were able to look at our students and our data in cutting it multiple different ways. So in this diagram, you can see that we could look at our neighborhoods. Here we used the information to mark developments. Each of these yellow areas for us is a development that's coming online in the next 3 to 5 years. And we actually had multiple colors showing which ones were immediate and which ones were a little bit later. And in this information, this is our census, so that you can do a deeper dive into the data to see where your youngest learners are coming from, to see where the growth, the future growth may be occurring. Just a little bit of information about the timing. Kind of managing the pace. If you setting up a defined time frame for each phase, the gathering of all the information, the selection of the committee work, the announcement of the projections or the announcement that would come out, public feedback, and then final decision, allowing time for each of them, but not so much time as that things get bogged down and you lose focus. The monitoring the school breaks and the school board meeting schedules is important, so that you want to make sure that you are presenting the information in a fashion that is transparent, and that people aren't finding out about having ample information time to respond and provide feedback. One of the schedules that we originally were working from caused us to run up against spring break, and we knew that that wouldn't feel good to our community if we weren't allowing them plenty of time that wasn't coinciding with spring break to provide feedback. Probably for us, the most important factor for success was the guiding principles, and I'm calling them the rules here, but it really is guiding principles. What is it you're trying to accomplish with the boundary changes? Open a new building, close a new building, change the makeup of the students, balance things, not balance things. I can't say enough that what is listed may be as important as what is not listed. So by omitting something such as transportation costs should be minimized, that has a huge implication if you don't have it down. Know that you're going to be committed to them for several months. You're going to live with these guiding principles. They are going to be viewed by the public. It's a criteria that is going to kind of be the report card for everybody. They guide work, they guide decision making, they guide how when you have to prioritize things, they help you make that decision. Each and every guiding principle has what I refer to as an equal and opposite reaction. And so you can say something as seemingly common sense as create neighborhood schools. And with that, parents that are affected by change can come back and say, I'm not going to the closest school. And so really being thoughtful on how strongly those guiding principles are worded, and thinking about them both from as an asset, but also almost as how would this not work to your advantage, or how would this guiding principle not work in the way that you intended it to work. Some of the considerations that I've worked with is transportation costs and times. The parameters. Do we want kids on a bus for no more than 40 minutes? Do we run a shuttle system? Do different things like that. Do you consider socioeconomics? Is having comparable free and reduced lunch at the schools a factor or not? Test scores. Siblings, and when I mean siblings is if you're changing middle schools in a short amount of time, will families have 2 kids in 2 different middle schools? Grandfathering is the term that we use to talk about the fact that we would let somebody finish out their time at a school. So a 4th grader may be allowed to grandfather and finish up 5th grade at their elementary school. The difficulty with that is always then the one before it, the siblings. Then if the older student is allowed to stay, does that mean the younger one is allowed to stay? There are no right or wrong answers to any of these, as long as you have the space and the time and the transportation to do these things. And they're all valuable. There's not one of these that isn't an exceptionally valuable decision-making parameter, but you really need to be thoughtful and consider the pros and cons of each one. Swing neighborhoods is something that the committee that I work with, we kind of coined the term. They are really strong neighborhoods that, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to come back to that one. Swing neighborhoods are areas that we would consider allowing families to choose. It could be that it really is a low impact neighborhood, or that you have to run buses through the area for 2 schools anyway. And so you may choose to call a swing neighborhood, or it could be considered a soft boundary shift, where you let kids choose, and the older or the younger kids automatically go to one school, but the older ones can finish up either way. Legacy neighborhoods is what I call the neighborhoods that have high PTO or PTA involvement, strong volunteerism in the neighborhoods. It's been a neighborhood that has always gone to blank school, and they've always been the ones that do the carnival and the PTA and the PTO. For whatever reason, they're kind of a backbone of the school. Again, that's something that you may say, well, they may be, but we're not going to consider it. That's very valuable. For others, that is a big change in the school, and they don't want to try to do that. High impact neighborhoods is what I started to refer to earlier. High impact neighborhoods are neighborhoods that are unique because they drive decision making. And what I mean by that is we have one particular neighborhood that is a lot of condominiums, and if depending in a very small area, there's like 150 kids. Depending on which way that neighborhood swung, it really had a significant effect on which school. So if you moved it to the school to the north, it changed the north. If you moved it to the school in the south, it changed all the other surrounding neighborhoods in the south. There are also high impact neighborhoods that are either by density or by racial or free and reduced lunch that are significantly different than those around them. And so again, you don't have to consider them, but you may choose to. And like walk and bike areas. And I would also add to walk and bike areas whether they are acknowledged walk and bike areas that the district then does not provide transportation, or whether they're community perceived walk and bike areas that on the nice days here in Minnesota, the nice days that people choose to walk and bike to school, may be different, or the kids that can bike to school with a parent may be different than an actual acknowledged area where there's no transportation offered. Just a couple more. When you go to the committee, are grade configurations, quote unquote, on the table? Is the board open to, instead of moving kids, do a K1, 2, 3, a primary and a secondary building rather than moving kids? Feeder schools. Do all the elementary students in one school need to go to a middle school or a junior high, or can they be split? Is our program locations able to be moved, or are they set? So if you have a language immersion program, can that be moved to a different school rather than moving a neighborhood? Or are the programs or specialized special education classroom, do they need to stay where they are? Again, it's just, are these open for discussion? Are they going to be in the guiding principles, or are they a non-issue? And then lastly, does the school board want multiple scenarios to review or a single recommendation? A lot of it will depend on what the school board, the tenor of the school board. I personally prefer bringing a single recommendation to the board. I find it really hard when if there's 1 or 2 scenarios, it has a tendency to pit neighbors against neighbors. There's winners or losers. But just knowing up front if you're driving to a single consensus, or if you're driving toward multiple scenarios. So now we're up to the plays and developing the plays, the scenario development with the citizen committee. In both cases that I've done this recently, we've had exceptional citizen committee, citizens that were willing to be objective, really think about all children, not their family, not their neighborhood. And we actually had that conversation up front with the committee, asking them, can they be, or at least acknowledging that it's hard to do, but that our goal is for all children. The first meeting was learning work, where we taught them about transportation and building capacities and enrollment growth and all those things that play into all the multifaceted pieces that play into boundary changes. The next piece, we worked multiple meetings with developing scenarios, and we were lucky in our school district that we had 3 people that were well versed in Guide K-12, and we actually broke into small groups, and they worked independently, 2 or 3 meetings in a row, and at the end of each meeting would come back and kind of present the work that they had done, sort of a defend and sell your scenario. And the groups really, the community members really enjoyed the ability to have the hands-on, can you move this neighborhood? Oh, that I don't like that. Can you move it back? And they really in both situations, community members were pulled up to the screens with their cell phones out looking at maps, good-naturedly arguing about which neighborhood or which area made more sense. The next phase is refining the scenarios and building consensus. So this is bringing, 2 or 3 or 4 possible scenarios into focus, refining them, working together to get to one. I will say that in between the committee meetings, staff or the experts are doing a lot of legwork. And so you're collecting additional data, you're double checking, you're running some additional information just to make sure that everything's staying on track. And that it's hard when you're in front of everybody to keep everything moving, but it's a good chance to go back in between the meetings and double check everything and make sure that everything's moving forward kind of systematically. The tools such as Guide K-12, if any kind of mapping or geovisual analytics tool should allow for the committee to work with the current data. It's helpful if the data can be reviewed and reported instantly. So, for example, if building capacities are an important, not overcrowding certain schools is a very important factor. Once you make some changes, it's very beneficial to be able to stop and double check that you're moving in the right direction, that you're not overcrowding a school or not having enough students in certain schools. Small groups, it was very beneficial for us to have small groups that could work independently and develop different types of scenarios and then come back together, and look to each other for feedback and ideas. And create multiple scenarios and then tweaks. We tweaked them and then would come back and look at them another time. As I reflect on this process, probably the most emotionally difficult part for the staff is the 2-minute warning. It's the end of the line where you've started out probably in a fairly organized fashion. You've had really good data. You've had, really a learning process. You've developed scenarios. And it's very hard toward the end to stay on task and stay focused. And so I will say that last push is really crucial to the success, that things don't kind of derail. It's very easy to say, let's pend on this, or let's postpone a decision for this many weeks. And it's just, I think it's the motion of it for a lot of people just to want to kind of take a breather. It's easy to lose focus on the guiding principles and start to take into account new data or new considerations. It's just human nature. There's some things that you at the beginning didn't think were important, and then somehow they start to feel important. For example, does the map look good? Does it follow major intersections? Does it look organized? If that wasn't one of your guiding principles from the beginning, to use major intersections as the boundaries, or that it should look highly organized, then it should not come back into play late in the process. But it's just human nature. Certain things that were not highly prioritized in the beginning, then once you've obtain those, it's easy to start putting more things on your to-do list. And so just a caution not to do that. A small number of your community members are able to make a lot of noise for and against. And it's a hard time to gauge where the valid concerns are and those that are based on people not wanting to move. And so it's hard in the noise to know which of them are really good, sensible feedback, something you may have missed, and which of those are just folks that don't want to do the change. There's a strong desire for all educators to want to respond to the concerns, and maybe there is legitimate feedback that needs to be taken into consideration. Just a caution not to undo the committee work, not to start taking pieces back out again and then kind of getting away from the guiding principles. Just reflecting, after the rules have been reviewed and agreed upon, the committee provides a recommendation to the school board. At this point, we had our parents and community have an opportunity to provide feedback. A pre-planned feedback loop is very important, whether that's an online form, whether it's email, whether it's an evening where parents can come and speak or be told the information. Any of those, all of those are very valuable. I will suggest that a pre-planned process for responding to the emails and the online feedback and the calls is really important. When we can currently send mass emails and we can copy and paste emails, it can get almost overwhelming to try to respond to everybody. So just a word of caution to decide who is going to be responding to emails and online feedback and how those responses look, so that everyone isn't responding to every email, many of which sometimes can start to look similar. For me, it was very interesting just to know, be aware of some of the new technology that parents and families, petitions, online petitions, I think it's change.org or whatever. It was very interesting to see petitions. Neighborhoods often have Facebook pages so that they are sharing both fact and rumors. And there's a lot of data sources. In Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Education has a lot of data online and available. And so parents were able to go find information on their own and synthesize some of the different information. So again, that leads back to having really strong, exceptionally thorough, repetitive, transparent data that everyone can agree upon is really important. The post game. So coming up this, you have developed the guiding principles with your school board. You have taken a citizens committee and you've taught them all about the process and things, the factors that and the boundary change, affect a boundary change. You've taken those committee members through and you've developed some scenarios, and you've made a recommendation to the school board, and now you've done a public input, public feedback loop, and then the board makes a final decision. Something that was very striking for me that I was not particularly prepared for was the immediate need for data and answers. And I mean literally that night that the board made the decision or the next morning, from both our community members as well as our own principals. Many times, will there be orientation activities for the new school that my child is going to? How will I find out about the gifted program? How will I find out about the sports teams? From the building principals, how many kids are moving to us? How many kids are moving away? What will be our building size? For the staff that are involved in this, the immediate need for that information is the next morning. And although you'd love to rest on your laurels and say that we just finished the process, it is almost just beginning. So just being prepared for that. Families want to know where their new school is and where their friends are attending, so having maps. And it's hard because if the board has just reviewed and made a decision, it's hard to have immediate maps. But having maps and being able to quickly utilize Guide K-12 School Search where you can put in addresses. For a lot of folks, it's not just where they're going to go, but where their kids from the swim team or the soccer team or the Girl Scouts are going to go. And so being able to have maps and lookups is very, very advantageous. And like I said, the need was literally at 7 o'clock the next morning. So just to replay some of the highlights, the takeaways that, if nothing else, to recall is that having strong, consistent data and information agreed upon ahead of time is exceedingly important. Having thoughtful, consistent guiding principles. And again, I can't tell you that you almost cannot spend too much time developing the guiding principles with your school board, because the community members will use those as a criteria whether you were successful or not and whether you were true to your word or not. Defining the roles of staff, community members, school board, principals, everyone, and what their objective is. And then just being really mindful about the timing and the decision making. Everyone knows this is an emotional process. So just trying to remain objective and developing a process for the timing and the decision making so that you don't have things that kind of get you off track. So with that, I will also say my email is at the beginning of this webinar. And so if there's any questions that we're not able to get to today, please feel free to shoot an email to me and I would be happy to follow up with you. So with that, Julie, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, Kristin, thank you. We've got lots of questions coming in, but I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the results of when you did this, kind of how did it turn out from a community response, you talked about being ready, but what was the reaction overall?
I think overall it was very, very positive. We ended up moving about 1,100 to 1,200 students in our school district. We were lucky that we did it about 14 months in advance, so we concluded last June 4th, and these are boundaries that will not be enacted until next fall. So for us, but I also worked with another school district this year, and we finished the process last month, and they're for next fall. So I will say the timing for us was beneficial to have it done in advance. So we had this whole school year to plan transition activities and to kind of have everyone prepared for their new school. So that's been very beneficial. I think even if you were affected by the change, you knew that you were not alone. Some of our community members, our committee members, jokingly said, just kind of rip off the Band-Aid, and if I have to move, and others have to move, we'll all be okay. And I think that's one thing we found is that you may think, an initial thought may be move as few children as possible. But actually our committee members said, with a new school, let's just hit the reset button and move everybody where they need to be so we can go 5 to 7 years. And so it was successful. It does and is impacting a lot of folks.
One of the questions that's come in is, what are the Wayzata class size guidelines? Can you speak to your class size guidelines?
I would have to do them from memory. I apologize. I don't have that. I'm at my home office and not at my desk. We have class size targets set by our school board. I hesitate to say but there are like something in the range of 20 for kindergarten, and I think they go up to 20 or 26 for some of our older elementary grades. And then with that, there's generally a 1 to 2 student buffer before we would add another section. But I'm going to just say don't quote me on that one because I don't have the numbers in front of me. Okay, that's fair. Sorry.
For the new developments that you plot, how do you determine the number of students for a single family, a multifamily? How do you look at how many students might be potentially coming out of a new development area?
One of that varies a lot from community to community. There is data out there that shows different what's typical on a statewide average. It is pretty, can be pretty specific to the area. We did have a housing and demographic study done by a specialist in advance. And so we were able to know that typically we have one child that comes out of each new home in our district. And so we use the assumption that if one student comes out of each new home, that they'd be 50% likely to be in an elementary school and 50% likely to be in a secondary school. We were a little off on that assumption. The majority of our families happen to be moving in with younger children. So, but the data for our district is that we see the result of about one child for each new build. And that does not take into consideration normal growth patterns with siblings, but that's just new construction.
How do you deal with multifamily units like an apartment?
I'm not sure what the question is. I mean, we treat them as a neighborhood. As
far as the assumptions of how many, like if it's a multifamily dwelling, do you still do the one student per dwelling?
Oh, no. Statistically, apartments are much lower. Townhouses are a little bit, or condominiums are slightly lower, and apartments are even lower than that. Single-family houses yield the most children, dramatically so.
Oh, okay. And then you had mentioned bus routes taking up to 40 minutes, and so a question came in about is that an average bus time for your district? Is 40 minutes on the bus?
No, ours is less than that because we're a suburban school district, and our bus routes are shorter than that. The other district I worked with had bus routes of over an hour. So it just is very, very unique, can be very unique to your district and what the assumptions are. I know there are plenty of communities that have kids on buses, more rural communities or sparse in density school districts that can have kids on the bus for 40 to 45 minutes. I think most of our bus routes are under 30.
There's lots of questions coming in about will this be emailed, and so all of these slides will be sent with the link to the PDF on our website, on the Guide K-12 website. All of this will be posted. You will be given that link to what Kristin has presented, as well as the recording. Again, I hope to have that posted in the next 24 hours, if not sooner. So you will have that. Kristin, can you repeat your email since it was on that first slide? Can you tell us what your email is so people can write that down, and we will include it in the email that we send out, but if you wouldn't mind just saying it.
Nope, that's fine. If you have any follow-up questions, my email address is Kristin, Kristin, .Tollison, Tollison, S as in Sam, ON, at Wayzata, Wayzata.K12.mn.us.
Thank you. During the pregame warm-up session, or on those slides where you were talking about the pregame warm-up and the data gathering stage, can you talk about, was all that data compiled by the district in advance, and was it ready for the committee's first meeting, or kind of what was the process and the timing of gathering that data, and how did that go?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We actually, because we'd gone through a referendum and we're building a new school, obviously we knew we were going to be doing this. So we did employ a housing demographic study that was very beneficial. We did that in the early fall of that year, in the fall over the winter break. We also before we invited the committee in, I actually sat down and just really tried to do some scenario building in Guide K-12 on my own. Interestingly enough, that's how I found one of the neighborhoods that just seemed to be a strong driving neighborhood because of their density, and they're right in the center of our school district. I started just for my own, to see what the patterns and where the issues were by myself. I actually, and then also invited in a middle school principal, an elementary principal, and some different folks, just so that they had some background on how difficult that this is. It seems like it just should be super simple to do, and it's really not. Anyone who's listening to this knows it's a very difficult process. So I built multiple scenarios with the director of transportation, principals, parents, different folks, and worked very hard on that. And so when I did them by myself, I came up with different scenarios. When the committee came, we were prepared for that. So when the committee came to come to work, we had a big binder. In fact, it was right before spring. No, it was right before. I'm drawing a blank. It was spring break. It must have been winter break. It was right before winter break, and they came in and we gave them each a big, huge binder. It had information about, we had building maps, we had all sorts of information about transportation, we had our housing study, we had information about our growth. So we did have all that in advance, and it was really good to have all that legwork, because once we started the process with the committee, it moves so quickly and it's so intense that you really can't stop and do a whole different report at that point.
And one of the things that, as you were showing those maps early on, I just wanted to point out those were Guide K-12 screenshots of the scenarios that you've created. And the
Yes.
one that showed development areas, you were talking about bringing in housing studies and development studies. And one of the things that you were able to do is take some of that information from an outside demographer, pull it into Guide K-12, and layer it over the top, so you could look at your students, your attendance areas, and those development zones all in one view, correct?
That is correct. That was part of the legwork that I did in-house in advance. Is we also very closely track the housing developments in our community, and so we regularly are being notified by the city, the school, the cities in our community, and we would then build these. Track all these. I have big maps in my office where I track these different developments, and so we built an entire layer over the whole map, so that we could double check which schools we were putting a lot of growth into, and which areas were more stable. So the areas, if we built a boundary around a school with lots of growth, we knew that we would not be able to fill it up. We need to allow for future growth.
The other thing that I think we should point out is, being sensitive to the privacy of your actual district data. We're not showing screenshots necessarily of the students, but
Right.
but just I just wanted to point out for all of the audience is that with Guide K-12, a district actually sees every student as a dot to the property that they're on. So
Yep.
when Kristin talks about these scenarios, you can get quite granular. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Kristin?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know. Are you still able to see my screens?
Yep.
Okay, so this map is where our birth to 4 students are, and so you can literally see where each new birth is. And you can dive in and see this information very clearly. You can scroll in. This happens to be all blue, but if you're working in students you can sort the children by multiple ages. Free and reduced lunch. You can map them by many different factors in Guide K-12, and each one kind of reveals a whole other pattern.
Thank you. You did such a nice job with the guiding principles. Can you give some further examples of some of the specific guiding principles that you created, and also for anybody's information, there is a case study with some of the specific ones all listed out on the Guide K-12 website, but can you kind of walk through some of your very specific guiding principles that you did create for either of the districts that you've just recently helped with the boundary change?
Certainly. Some of the ones, one of the first ones that was important for us in Wayzata was to try to have them last. So as I said, our Citizens Committee felt very strongly that if we could hit the reset button and get all the buildings situated for at least 3 to 5 years and hopefully 5 to 7, that our hope is that students would not have to make a change during their elementary career. So that was one of ours. We also wanted to move, our community was interested in moving to feeder schools. So 5 of our 7 elementary schools were split, and some of the students went to one middle school and some went to another. And so we were hopeful that we'd be able to develop feeder schools so that all of an elementary school went to a middle school. We wanted to maintain transportation costs and not have the boundaries create a budget impact by causing a real significant change in our transportation budget. Having children go to the nearest school, having our exposition to that wasn't one of our guiding principles. Having an entire neighborhood, so using neighborhoods, and that's that map that we developed that was our neighborhoods. They were divided on major streets, major highways, parklands, waterlands, so that if if they were the kids that you played with at the park, or if they were the kids that you played with, in your neighborhood, that you would all go to the same school. So those are some of ours. The other school district that I worked with was very interested in using socioeconomic data as one of their tools, and so we were regularly looking back and making sure that we were driving toward balance socioeconomics rather than away from it. So those are some of the specifics.
That's great. And again, for when we send out the link, I can include the case studies that detail those out. One of the questions that's come in, I think, is one that maybe I'll tackle. It says, does Guide K-12 have the ability to show different scenarios at a school board workshop based on board member suggestions to change the boundary? This would all allow for answers right away to the board. And yes, we do have districts that do use it live with their school board, and it really does help when a scenario can be shown. What it does is it also tracks all the logic of each scenario, and so you can show the scenario live and also show all of the logic that went into building that scenario. And so everybody can understand what neighborhoods were moved and what groups were selected and what characteristics were assumed. And so it makes it easy for people to follow and understand, and it also makes it easy to make changes on the fly and see the impact instantly, because there are reports then you can look at and say, okay, how did I affect capacity by building, by classroom, by school? How did I affect any of the different demographics that you want to look at? You can see that in a report very, very quickly. Kristin, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add from a question about the live meetings with school board members. Anything else you'd want to add?
No, I think that can be very valuable. That's exactly what we did with our small groups. We broke into 3 small groups and had our community members, and they became exceptionally knowledgeable. And one thing that I didn't share was they became so knowledgeable about all the information, as well as how we arrived at the scenario, that they made the recommendation to our school board. No staff even spoke. They presented a PowerPoint and were able to stand for Q&A about the recommendation. So it is a very it's very transparent, and you're able to see how you got to where you ended up.
Can you talk about how often you updated the school board, what their expectations were, and the depth that you gave them, the depth of information that you gave them as you were going through the process?
After they developed the guiding principles, then we worked very quickly.
That was in conjunction with the board?
Yep,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Was that in conjunction?
Yep. The guiding principles were the boards. They reviewed it over a few meetings. They took a vote on it. Then we worked very quickly with the committee. One, to enhance confidentiality, because what we didn't want was having a lot of we didn't want the committee members to be being asked a lot of questions by their friends and neighbors and being pulled in multiple directions. So we met very quickly 4 Thursday nights in a row and hit it pretty hard on learning and scenario development and preparing a recommendation. So the board would get just brief updates about the committee and the work that they were doing, but it was not until their board work session where they saw the first recommendation, which I believe, if I recall correctly, was in March. And then that evening, the recommendation was live for public input. So we presented the recommendation, or the committee presented the recommendation to our school board at their work session, and then that night maps were live on our school district website. The feedback loop was live, the online feedback, and we did a constant contact to every family in the district, letting them know that this recommendation had been made so that everyone was alerted to it.
And you had mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to elaborate on it because you mentioned that Guy K-12 School Search went live. And what that is an online web tool, an address lookup tool for parents. So when Wayzata made these changes, they could show the current boundaries on their website. Then they also went live with an address lookup tool that showed the new boundaries. And so when Kristin said school search, that's what that is. That's part of the Guy K-12 suite. So I think you might have said this, but I'm going to ask you to repeat it again. So from start to finish, what was the length of your process?
The committee met the last Thursday before winter break. I think we had them in winter break. They met January and early February. Then we made a recommendation to the board, took feedback, did some additional work, made some additional changes at the board's request, and each time our board, our pattern is that something comes to a work session, and then the final decision is made at a regular session 2 weeks later. So significant decisions such as this would take 2 meetings to approve, and it was approved June 4th of last year.
Okay, so about 5 months?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and then I know that this hasn't been a consideration for Wayzata, but you've got a lot of insight into how this all works. If somebody was closing a school and redistributing the students, are there other things that should be taken into consideration, or anything else beyond what you've mentioned that might be good advice for somebody closing? And I'll just add for the person with that question, I also have some case studies out online of some districts that have closed, and I will include those links again or as well in the email that goes out for those that are interested in if you are consolidating. We've got some districts that have gone through that. But Kristin, anything from your experience? I know that that's a little different than your district currently, but any insights on that one?
That is not one that I've personally worked through the process in that way. You know, watching the news and knowing districts that have had to struggle through that, I would say that probably the need and expectation for clear, transparent, consistent data would be even more important. I mean, it's important, I can't stress it enough, but I can only say that it would even be a higher expectation in that type of situation. And I think I think if all the emotions that go into this type of thing can only be even more enhanced, the ability to stay on a timeline and stay objective has got to be even more difficult. At least if you're opening a building, a chunk of students that are experiencing change, you know, can have the excitement of going to a new school. If you're taking a school offline, the emotions have got to be just that much more difficult because the change you're going into an existing school. So off the top of my head, I will ponder that. I can't think of anything other than just, again, clear, consistent guiding principles that everyone agrees to on up front and what the goals are, and clear and consistent and transparent data that is unchanging, so that parents aren't feeling like somebody's doing a bait, which could only be even more heightened than if you're adding a school or just changing boundaries.
And I would add from the districts that have gone through it that I've talked to about, kind of their successes with it is really getting a cross-functional, very involved group and getting that grassroots support early on, and really having people looking at the need and trying to get that committee really working together up front. But it does come down to communication and keeping people very informed and having those facts and data, like you said. I've got a couple more, and I know that we're getting tight here on time. Do all district employees choose where they go to school or choose where their kids go to school in your district? Can the employees choose for their kids?
In our school district, district staff are by and large, I mean, they're district residents like everyone else. So the same processes and procedures, they're assigned to their home school. We do have a process that we use called an intra-district building transfer. And families can request to attend a different school, and it has to have approval, and there has to be space. And so there's some principles that go with that. But in general, no, our staff do not have the ability to just choose a school.
In Guide K-12, when you're looking at status of transfer, you can look at it from students that are going to their home assigned areas, students that are open enrolling within the district, or students that are coming from outside of the district. And that's important when you're looking to move boundaries. If you have open enrollment, you really need to take into consider where those students are coming from. And you can see all that with our tool, because you can slice it and dice it and choose those characteristics. And that becomes pretty important. As you worked to shift enrollment, how did you manage the capacity by looking at elementary capacity or middle school or high school capacity?
In Guide K-12, you can set the building capacities and actually the class sizes in the background. And so we did study our schools and study our maps, and we had those target building capacities and our target class sizes, and so those are all in the background of Guide K-12. And so you can keep kind of a running capacity. You can run reports as you move through, and you can see when you're approaching 70% or 80 or 110%. And then for us, then as the committee worked through those and was watching capacity, they knew that in the schools that had a lot of growth, they needed to leave capacity for the future growth if these were going to last for 5 years. And so then in between meetings, I would go back and take spreadsheets and add in the future growth. And that was the only thing that Guide K-12 obviously can't track, is what we think might happen someday. But we would manually put that information in just to do a double check that these would hold for 5 years. And so I think that kind of covers the question.
Yeah, there was one last question, and it was just talking about how do you do some statistical simulations or allow for different probabilities of different growth rates? Like with your development areas, did you play with some different scenarios, or how did you do that?
We used the information that we got from our housing study, and so then we would, two different ways we would take the data and project it forward. That wasn't a part of Guide K-12, so once we got to scenarios that met our criteria and seemed to be pretty much a good solution or a possible solution, then we would go back and add in our normal growth factor, and we would also then overlay our new housing developments and make sure that they would hold then for 5 years.
Excellent. Well, we are at the top of the hour, and first of all, thank you for all the questions. I really appreciate it from all the attendees. Obviously, there's a lot of good questions and a lot of support. So again, I just want to reinforce the Guide K-12 team is here to support you with your boundary changes. If in any way we can, we'd love to demo our software for you to see, so you can see it live and in person. We will be sending out this information, like I said earlier, and Kristin has offered her email address. And the Guide K-12 website does have additional information. But before I wrap it up, I just want to say thank you to Kristin. And again, it is just such a pleasure to work with you. And you make this sound like it was clockwork, but it is a lot to do with how you work, and you do just such a nice job. So I can't thank you enough for all you do, and on our product as well as just across your district. You do just such a great job. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the attendees, and everybody have a good afternoon.
Thanks for having us tonight. Nice to visit with everyone. Thank you.
Take care.